Legacy of a Traitor. Chapter 12. King Genra rebuilt each battlefield into a glorious bastion of Error, as if preparing for a retaliation that never had a chance to spring. His rule over new subjects was tough, but it was never stifling. Even so, revolts erupted somewhere nearly every week. His visage became more tense with each passing day, and he sent the sword of the king to ensure his rising kingdom, no, his empire, was secure. Verse 12 of the Confessional Monolith. The day had barely dawned, and Seth was already feeling yesterday's weight all over again. At least he was more used to it now, as used as one could be with the threat of utter destruction slowly crawling up the sides of his home. He had just spoken to Weapon, and though Cullen hadn't been spotted by it yet, it was clear that everything was going well so far. That, alongside the otherworldly creature's confidence, had helped to reinforce his sanity. Why the creature was so obsessed with food was off-putting, as was its constant allusions to some sort of text that involved it. Seth had never appreciated an unknown factor in his plans, but in this case, even the smallest potential alteration was utterly detestable. Within another several minutes, he was dressed and outwardly ready to begin this final day of preparation. As he descended the steps, he thought over the whole of the schedule in his mind, pinpointing exactly which parts of the yearly feast could be lessened now that it was being hosted in the village. A redusting and cleansing of the interior chambers was not needed, and that time could be better spent setting up the tables, chairs, and dining tents that the Carfelians had generously donated for the cause. Though it was a small thing, he was truly thankful at how excited the inhabitants of the valley had been to feast together with the Cernier family and the other Genra knights. He supposed that was what years of constant goodwill had attained, even after the slight increase of the quota. However, such a perception clashed with the rather strange exchange that was happening in the Great Hall. A young woman, one Seth had never heard before, was speaking rapidly and forcefully in the Aurorian tongue, but it was in a broken and stilted fashion. Meanwhile, several of the guards were around her, faces brimming with multiple levels of confusion and desperately trying to communicate, but the deformed conversation was approaching nothing but chaos. "No, I rule here! King Cernier said so!" King Cernier? As Seth circled the final loop of the stairwell, he could see that she had the golden hair of the Carfelians, but her phrasing was similar to the attempts of the early dealings with the outskirt stewards. "Please, miss, calm yourself," the guard pleaded, glancing at his comrade. Voy, is she drunk? I don't know if she's drunk. It's too early in the morning for drinking. No, miss, I don't even know what that thing is." "I shall take it! I shall take your fire and metal with this!" She was waving about a familiar emerald token, and Seth hurried forward, now aware of what the trouble was. "Good morning, Guardsman Voy, Pierre, and Charles. You may stand down. I shall handle this." They nodded and backed away, clearly relieved, and she looked at Seth in confusion. He gave her a quick bow. "Good morning, madam." The Carfelian language was prone to quick speech, which was preferable in such a situation. "Please forgive their confusion. I am Lord Cernier, and I can authenticate your request, provided it is within the realm of reason. What would you have us do with the coin?" "Lord Cernier?" She looked surprised for a moment, which sent a slight dash of annoyance down Seth's mind, but her sudden and genuine smile caused it to suddenly evaporate. "Wow, your Carfelian is really good! That'll make this way easier. Didn't you tell Cullen that anyone with one of these has access to the secrets of your citadel?" She handed him the coin with the clear image of Lord Tanier Cernier upon it. He narrowed his eyes. "I mentioned only the forges and the gardens. If he said—" "Oh yeah, that's what he said too. Just checking." She snatched it back from his hand and flicked it up in the air. "The name's Therina, and I'm here for the forge access. Can you please point the way?" Therina, As she caught the coin again, Seth gave the matter some quick thought. Considering how far Cullen already was from the village, and how early in the morning she had arrived to claim its benefits, he must have given it to her mere moments after he'd left the citadel. "First, tell me if there are others who will be claiming this benefit as well. If any similar confusion occurs today of all days, I'd like to know in advance." "I wouldn't think so. He was pretty secretive about these things. In fact, I'd wager that I'm the only one with a token so far." Now everything was becoming a little clearer. That Cullen had been aware of their importance was good, though how he began by using these particularly important boons as a courting gift left Seth disapproving. Even so, her enthusiasm was quite real and rather intense, so perhaps he had more of a reason than it seemed. He nodded. "Understood. Follow me. I'll show you the way." "Ooh, what an honor. Just a second. She shook the hands of each guard in turn, saying, "Thank you," in Aurorian thrice to them. As Seth motioned her down the pathways of the East Wing, he asked, "Tell me, why have you begun to learn our speech? I can't say it is excellent yet, but you certainly have the enunciations understood." Even some of the most loyal Carfelians, such as the Frenet family, hadn't gone so far as to do that. "Well, I've always dreamed of getting to see inside this place, and especially to use some of the machines you've got here, the ones that make all of those bits and baubles every month, and if I can't speak Genrian, then how can I learn from your smiths? Only a few others, the officers I think you call them, can even speak our language at all, right?" "That is the case, though I can see that the need for further communication is necessary. Shall I have one of the officers serve as a personal translator for the time being while you are here?" "Oh, that'll be swell! However, I still want to get the hang of Genrian, at least until I can even make it past your big hall there." She laughed. "I really thought I had the hang of it till those guys looked all scared. Ah well, I'll have it figured out soon for sure." "Yes, of course." Seth had been too distracted by that laugh to say anything more. It was so full of optimistic zeal for the absurdity of life, as if mistakes were just things to be laughed at. Such a concept was downright nonsensical to him, yet he couldn't help but smile at it. As they passed by the chilled storage rooms, Seth called out a "good morning" to Officer Joriam, who, as per the schedule, was busy with accounting for the number of Carfelian supplies to be brought to the kitchen for the feast. "Good morning, Lord Cernier. Glad to report that all's well here so far." "And I'm glad to hear it, Joriam, though if you would, I have a request for you." Seth motioned to Therina, who was examining the walls on either side of the doorway, intrigued by the extreme disparity in the room's temperature. Joriam chuckled. "Well, look at that," he said in Carfelian. "What a pleasant surprise to have you here in the Citadel, Miss Hina." She glanced up and waved at him. "Hi there, Jory. Before you ask, yes, we'll have at least 3 kegs filled with the spiced cider by tomorrow." Seth looked back and forth between the two. "Ah, you know each other already?" Of course they did. It made sense considering Joriam was one of the quota collectors. "Yes, Miss Hina's family runs the brewery down in the south part of the village. It's a lovely place. You should visit it sometime, my lord." She grinned. "Absolutely. I'll even give you a discount." Though he wasn't sure why the daughter of a brewing family had such an interest in forges, Seth was happy to hear it. The Carfelian cider had been one of the most sought-after goods for nearly as long as the Cernier clan had been in the valley. Fortunately, Joriam was nearly finished with his work, and he promised to catch up within a few minutes. Soon, the two of them approached the imposing iron of the forge room doorways. Therina was glancing all around at the familiar halls with wonder, and Seth realized that he would have to convince Festus to take her in. Would the secretive forge room families tolerate one of the Carfelians to even set foot in their hallowed home? How he wished he had considered that when he'd granted those coins to Cullen. Well, there was nothing to do now but to ask. If all else failed, he could offer an even larger reward than what their efforts to subdue the lake wolf had earned. He struck the doorway twice with his hand and waited for an answer. He knew better now than to try and sneak in. "This huge door's made out of a single piece of metal. I didn't even know that was possible." Before Seth could respond, the doorway opened, and Festus poked his face out through it.
"Ah, young lord. I could tell it was you from that slightest touch on our gate."
He lifted his protective goggles up and raised his splotched eyebrows.
"Though I wasn't expecting her. Well, good on you, lad."
Seth squinted for a moment in perplexment at the odd compliment as he responded. Don't be mistaken. She's here due to the generosity of her beloved. Therina is the first of the select few Carfelians invited to the Citadel." Though his words were in Aurorian, he couldn't help but glance at her as the realization of what this looked like finally occurred to him, and the tips of his ears felt a bit singed. Unfortunately, she took his short stare as a cue. Clearing her throat with determination, she exclaimed in her broken Aurorian, "Greetings, grandfather! Your metal eyes I love and possess!" Festus blinked in confusion, and after some quick explanation between themselves, Seth translated. "I believe she was greeting you as a dignified senior. She also likes the style of your lenses, and says that she has a similar pair of her own at home." She nodded in agreement to her own words.
"Well, strange as this Therina is, she seems charming enough. Don't you worry, Lord Cernier. She'll be welcome here, so long as she doesn't muck up something."
As Seth related that to her, she cheered. "Yes! Thanks, Lord Cernier. You just wait. This whole coin thing'll be the best decision you've ever made." The door closed, and Seth found himself feeling better than he'd had in a long time. However, as he entered the main hall again and heard Madame Athel calling out orders to some guards outside, organizing the setup of booths and receptacles for the Carfelian offerings, The slight and almost imperceptible tremor in her voice caused the full memory of yesterday to return with a vengeance. She nodded to him as he approached. "Lord Cernier, is all well so far?" Though her words were vague, her eyes were quite clear regarding what she meant. "Our allies' mission is proceeding apace, and confidence of success is only growing." Madame Ethel sighed. "That is good. I suppose there is no need for my concern at the moment. In fact, it might be a prudent idea to take a page from Eldred. He has flung himself wholeheartedly into his work preparing special dishes in the garden. We cannot affect the outcome as of now, not without further information, so let us devote ourselves to this task." Seth couldn't help but to agree. Somehow, besides everything else, or perhaps because of it, her presence and words had become a comfort. Soon, the Carfelians arrived with their offerings, their excitement second only to Tharina's, and Seth focused entirely on ensuring that the feast would hold only the most wonderful prizes and attractions. He sorted through the several new statues that Thessling had provided in addition to the trophies, silently wondering how the woodcarver had been able to produce so many in such a short time. There were a few unique stones gifted by some of the workers from the northern mines, each softly shining with a strange multicolored light like some sort of naturally forming globe. Though numerous, all of the interactions had been a lovely experience. Even so, in the darkness of every blink and the blur of every aside glance, he saw Jin's jar, Cullen's determined face, and the faraway traveler's pass where everything would be decided. As the sun reached its zenith, exactly 24 hours until the feast's beginning, all of the Carfelians' offerings had miraculously been approved. Seth was relieved. He had almost expected for Thessling's trophies to have been half-painted, or for Ivy Frenet's performance to sound off-key, but both of their gifts had been in top form, as had most of the others. The skill of the valley's people must have depths to which he'd only just peered at. It had gone smoothly, and yet he was already feeling exhausted. Such a drain on his faculties wasn't due to the events of the day exactly, but by the constant wrenching of his mind from Jin and the threat just so that he could function. The desire to leave all this behind and lock himself in the archives to receive constant updates from Jin was strong, but he knew that it would be distracting for the creature, and besides, there was a particularly important meeting about to begin, a meeting which he'd both completely expected and absolutely dreaded. He looked out over the eastern parapets, and saw the approaching caravans of the populace of the 3 citadels moving through the forest and the plains, each emblazoned with the sigil of the outskirt stewards. He would have to receive them today, then inform them of the dire threat before the commencement of the feast tomorrow. Would they agree to help, or would they balk and flee back to their fortresses, losing all hope in Seth? He took a deep breath and descended to meet them in the great hall.
"Oh, old Valiant. Still around, I see."
A gravelly, yet deep and rumbling voice called out as Seth arrived in the vast room, and he saw Cowron Ives, the former steward of Lake Eye Citadel, clasp hands with Valmir, who fortunately seemed to have made a full recovery from last night.
"Aye, that I am. I wouldn't deprive my friend now, at this most spectacular of feasts."
Seth breathed a sigh of relief as he heard the carefree laughter between them. These old men had been long-time friends, despite their difference in standing, and the young lord began to wonder if the irregularity in the Ives' letters had been born out of a simple misunderstanding. Seth approached, welcoming the dignified guest with a bow. "Good day to you, Sieur Cowron. I trust you are well? Is your son, the new steward, about? I don't see him here."
Cowron laughed. Good day, Lord Cernier. Don't worry about him. He wanted to look around the town first. He loves what you've done with the place, all the unity and all that."
It was typically customary for a visiting steward to go straight to the citadel first, but so long as it was for a positive reason, Seth didn't mind too much. He nodded his understanding towards Sieur Cowron, but his thoughts at the moment were mainly on the old guard. Was he simply putting on a strong face after his agony last night? "Valmir, if you need further rest, please don't push yourself." Valmir looked confused for a moment before turning a shade red.
"Oh, forgive me, Lord Cernier. After you told me to wait by the stairwell, I fell to drinking, and I don't remember anything I might have said afterwards. Margie mentioned I was in a bit of a state in front of you, so I'm afraid that I feel rather ashamed."
I see." Cowron clapped Valmir on the back.
"Well then, let's make sure we drink in moderation today, and build up our defenses for tomorrow."
The 2 men laughed, and for a moment Seth envied him for his capacity to forget, wondering just how much inner turmoil still burned within the guard, hidden by time in the veil of memory. Unfortunately, he couldn't dwell on the matter for long, as a striking figure burst through the doorway on a strange steed, followed by a few distressed guards. Though the oldest out of the current stewards, Steward Clive Bortel was certainly the most muscular and athletically skilled of the lot, and his constant energy and painted patterns on his face made him by far the most imposing, especially when riding his exotic beast. It was a soft-eyed and scaled creature that moved low to the ground. He had called it a pangolin.
"Greetings, Lord Cernier. I heard tell you've had an exciting few days, even beyond this feast. May I see your new creature, test its strength?"
He swept back his long and curly hair, glancing about as if he expected to see it there and then in the great hall. For a moment, Seth was terrified that the secrets of yesterday had been loosed, but Captain Hinault saved him by interrupting.
"Apologies, steward, but the lake wolf we've captured is too unique of a specimen to simply hunt down. Though if his lordship wishes, you are welcome to examine it for yourself."
Yes, Seth nodded. "Please be welcome to the Citadel."
"Ah, many thanks. It shall provide proper inspiration for a nighttime hunt. We'll need a few more for the feast, yes?"
Though Seth was fairly sure everything had been prepared, the excitement in the steward's eyes told him that this wasn't purely a necessary endeavor. "The eastern forest should still have some game, but be careful. Any lake wolf still about will be starving."
"All the more reason to venture out."
Steward Bortel saluted Seth, clicked his teeth while shifting the reins, and followed Captain Hinault out while still on the pangolin. To see such a creature casually walking through the halls would usually be out of the question, but Bortel seemed to have it well under control, so Seth reluctantly let them go. Hopefully his beast would be well situated in the stables, though Seth wasn't quite sure what sort of food it craved. As expected, there were about 50 people of varying age from the forested fortress, the somewhat informal name of Bortel's Citadel, many of whom were wearing marks of more subdued patterns than their leader, but they thankfully did not share the extent of his boldness of speech or choice of steed. Nevertheless, they were a lively group, whose ancestral tradition involved dressing in the simple yet sturdy leather of their prey, though Seth noticed that more of them were wearing the scaled hide of lake wolves than ever before. The faint azure tint was a far cry from the green scales of Mist Bay's nobility, but he couldn't help wondering if this was a slight form of improvable rebellion. There were other wild beasts in the valley, but many rivers from the lake flowed through the southern forest, so it made sense for their hunts to end in the acquisition of the aquatic predators. Most of his already faint qualms were suppressed upon seeing the friendly meeting between many members of his citadel and Bortel's, especially among some of the gardener families. That's right, though the original clans of the citadels were of differing realms only brought together like this by the will of the old empire, many of the Arorites who now populated the citadels of the valley originated from families who served House Cernier in the lands of Mist Bay, the few exceptions being servants of the rebellious lords who had since sworn fealty. These few included the stewards themselves, but their concern with how Seth ruled had come from them personally, and it wasn't likely to extend to the same degree among the rest of their populace. Regardless, he would ensure that their unity was secure when he would speak with each of them in person. The threat of Markelt and Rotrar should make that a simple task, but he would have to be careful not to end up convincing them only of Clan Cernier's weakness in the face of such danger. For now, he would show only a calm and welcoming front. Seth continued to greet them, and motioned for servants to direct them to their living quarters. Though they had arrived at the same time, the few inhabitants of the mountainside citadel far to the east of the valley moved like shadows among those of Bortel's forested fortress, though none moved as silently as the white-cloaked steward Evine Jesper, who had just been talking to Madame Athel. Seth approached her, and was surprised to see that she almost flinched. The awkward steward was an unassuming and somewhat spindly woman, to the point that Seth had often been joked to be her long-lost cousin. There seems to be a rather large kerfuffle outside. Are we really having the feast in the village tomorrow? Seth nodded. Good day to you, Steward Jesper. Yes, providing it in the heart of the Carfelians' home is sure to bring us together with them in a way unlike any before it. Though her grunt of disgust could be taken as a sign of her worries about the Carfelians mentioned in the letter a few weeks ago, Seth hoped that it was more likely to be her extreme preference for the indoors rearing up. Even in such a remote location, she had been the least likely of the 3 stewards to complain in the letters. In that case, might I have one of those tents to myself? And please, if you have it, could you bring the 3rd volume of Chronicler Revel's History of Mist Bay to it? The tale left off on such an infuriating cliffhanger that I truly must have it as soon as possible. Of course, Steward Jesper. Though if my memory serves, it was detailing whether or not the Cernier line would end with Lord Tenier Cernier at the Battle of the Bay. I fear that the result of that conflict is already pretty clear. The ending of such a tale is only a small part of why it interests me. The way such a tale plays out is something spectacular all on its own. She adjusted her crystalline spectacles and glanced upwards. Would the archives be accessible nowadays, or are they still limited only to the Cerniers? After a brief hesitation, Seth confirmed that the latter was still in effect, but that any volume could be hers to borrow upon request. Though he would have loved to take such an opportunity to try and mend the wariness between him and Steward Jesper, the archives were on the same level as Seth's own quarters. Though it was an unlikely possibility, she might become aware of Jin's existence. I see. I'll have an aide provide a list. I don't suppose you reserved the Noonshadow Grove as well. It's the least you could do, as I'm sure you don't need 2 different places of personal silence at once. Her somewhat icy tone was hardly concealed. Seth supposed that it was not necessarily coincidental that the 2 most secluded places in the Citadel had been where he had conversed with Jin, but it would be exceptionally rude to deny her this as well. He just hoped that Eldred had done a good job at restoring the grove after last night. Of course, I don't think it will be seen much use, not with all the preparations focused on the village. She sighed in relief, gave him a short bow, and turned around to leave. Doing so, she almost bumped into the newest steward, the one Seth had the sparsest understanding of, young Rashon Ives. His family hailed from the mountainous Krunu region, far past even the old lands of Mistbay, a place where features were sharp and men were tall and cunning. Though his father had grown too rounded for this to be clear, Rashon was the spitting image of their easy strength. She muttered an apology as she departed, but the young steward waved it off with an easy smile. Seth tried to match it with one of his own. "Welcome to the village citadel, Steward Ives." "Many thanks, Lord Seth." His voice was strong but relaxed, almost as if he was simply talking to a close friend. "My, it's good to hear that for the first time. I'd feared that I would be shunned for my failure to report in a timely manner of my new office. Please, accept my apologies for such a fiery start to our relationship." Seth smiled in relief. "In return, I would like to ask your forgiveness for using such heavy-handed language in my response." Rashon laughed. "Don't worry about it, Lord Seth. I fully understand. Diplomacy is a tricky beast, and while shouting is necessary with large distances and long times, we can be much more cordial when we're together like this. Besides, we were wrong to try and use old Error's tricks to try and ensure our safety in this land." He gestured behind himself, towards the village. "I had no idea that such a simple feast would be appreciated by the autochthons so much. All I've done is assist them with building homes and a granary by the lake shore, and while they've been quite thankful and courteous, I've hardly seen the fervour with which this village has lauded their overlord. They must really love you know." He patted Seth's shoulder in a quick, cheerful manner. "Next time, use a carrot like that for us, and I'm sure our camaraderie will only improve." The new steward was bold indeed. Seth gave a short nod. "If such a tactic is desired, I look forward to seeing it fully served as deserved." Rashon smiled, took a step back, and gave Seth a deep bow. "Point taken. Well, see you around, Lord Seth." He hurried up the spiral staircase 2 steps at a time, his aides puffing after him as they ascended to his reserved quarters. "Yes, please enjoy your stay here." Seth rubbed his chin. Despite Rashon's overtly cheery demeanor, there had still been a faint edge in some of his statements. How could such embodied strength and experienced words come from one 3 years his junior? Well, now that a common enemy lay at their border, Seth was sure that the strength of their trust would only be strengthened. However, Rashon's brief allusions towards certain construction efforts were concerning, despite the positive effects he'd attributed to them. If they were more than simple assistance, such an effort would be something just as necessary to report as a transfer of leadership, if not more so due to how it could affect their relationship with the Carfelians. Though, Seth realized with a slight wince, perhaps the concern he felt was only a selfish sting, that Steward Ives genuinely sought to improve the lives of his people, and was doing so in a far more proactive way than he had ever done, even now. Should that not be commendable? As the day neared its conclusion, Seth couldn't help but find it relieving that all 3 of the stewards and their people had been so amiable and good-natured, at least with him. Perhaps he had been obsessing over that fiery letter for too long, or maybe they were just enthralled by the wondrous appearance of the village-wide feast. Regardless, worrying about it wouldn't help now. All that was left to do was to enjoy a shared meal and...
"Lord Cernier, you must come and see this!"
The voice came from Jeffariah, a man from one of the Forge-room families. The large man was almost out of breath, and Seth realized that he had run all the way from the basement. His blood froze. Had something happened to Therina down there? "What's wrong? Is anyone hurt?" Just as the fear from imagining the worst-case scenario of an excited Carfelian reaching too far into a lit furnace threatened to show, Jeffariah shook his head.
"No, it's wonderful. In the walls, she found a secret treasure."
"Huh?" The clamor quickly attracted many, and soon Seth and about a dozen others all pushed into the forge rooms, the usual procedures all but forgotten in the excitement. There, he witnessed the result of a shocking alteration to one of the farther walls in the eastern refinery. It appeared to have been broken apart at its base as a single slab moved aside, transforming the stone itself into a massive 12-foot door. Beyond that new and gaping opening was a wide space containing what seemed to be several large square barrels, each made of steel. One of them, the container to the lower left of the opening, had been slightly punctured near its top. The wound in the metal dripped forth a clear liquid that seemed to be water, but a noticeably sweet scent hung in the air. Therina was grinning, and Festus called Seth over.
"Lord Cernir, this lady's a genius! Not much yet when it comes to forging, but all these years and we didn't notice that there's too much space between this place and the hallway back up. With that little tidbit, we realized that the little fissure there was more of a hinge than a flaw, and that there's a whole compartment here for some sort of storage."
He pointed up at the mass of stone.
"You'd think that thing would be heavy, but it swings over easily. I've no clue at all why the old coot would hide such a thing from us, though."
Joriam glanced at Seth in concern. "Do you have any idea what this arrangement might be? I don't recall ever seeing this in the schedule or hearing it in the stories." Seth had read the plans provided to the Citadel by architect Nostro Ronsalio, and nothing within them had mentioned secret chambers, let alone rooms filled with strange containers of sweet-smelling liquid. Neither have I. However, it seems clear to me that these have been here ever since the Citadel's construction 3 decades ago. Whatever this liquid is, it may have spoiled next to this constant heat. Festus shook his head.
"Actually, it's not bad. A bit too light for my tastes, but rather drinkable."
You ingested it?" Flashbacks to Ser Gierno's dreadful habits passed through Seth's mind. "Why? It could have been poisonous!" The Forge Master shrugged.
"Well, we didn't have much choice in the matter. There were a few thin and sturdy bars of stone that kept the door shut, so we borrowed some tools to break them apart. We were a bit too eager with the last, and we happened to puncture one of those bricky barrel things. On the fortunate side, they seemed to be quite well stocked, as a pressurized stream of the stuff hit me dead in the face."
Somehow that was almost worse than simply choosing to drink this mysterious substance. He glanced at Rashon, who was staring at the objects with a concern that rivaled his own. If this had resulted in some sort of boiling poison, it would have set a dark pall over the day. Even as it was, this wouldn't bode well for the steward's confidence in him. "There's something especially strange about it, Lord Cernir." Therina tapped the edge of the torn metal barrel. "All of these were barely a few inches away from the heat of the forge room, and yet they're almost completely chilled. I know we're underground, but I've been sweating like the mountain spirit seeing a flower, and I bet a stone hardly seems enough of a barrier." She put a finger to her mouth, frowning. "Also, it doesn't taste like cider, but I can't help feeling that it's from some kind of tree as well. I think it's something about the scent." Rashon approached, narrowing his eyes and examining one of the square-shaped barrels carefully. "I'd be careful with what is done about these things. The Aurorians left them here for a good reason, and I doubt one of those was for secret parties in the forge rooms." Seth couldn't help but agree with him, and he stepped upon one of the raised platforms with some of the heavy tools, speaking loudly to all present. "This is a truly marvelous discovery indeed, but please let us make a full investigation before anything further is torn apart. We are fortunate that this doorway can even be placed back into the wall. We may not be so lucky the next time. Worse, we may harm the structure we live in to the point of danger." An eager forgeman raised his hand amidst the resulting grumbles.
"Aye, but this one's already torn, so kindly asking, may we use it now, your lordship?"
Seth slowly nodded. "Provided that it is safe, I think that such a compromise would be acceptable." Rashon shrugged in agreement as the forge room let out a cheer. With nearly 12 men working together, the container was slowly moved out of the hole, and though Seth could have sworn that he heard something snapping from behind it, the hidden doorway was closed without any further destruction. Throughout the next few hours, and into the evening feast, the hidden compartment was the talk of the whole Citadel, and, as Seth imagined, at least partially widespread in the village around Hina's brewery. Eldred had checked with everyone who had tasted it, done some tasting of his own, and found it to be non-toxic at the very least. That was fortunate, but with so many risks and so many dangers to keep track of, Seth remained a little concerned that they'd potentially come so close to another one. The mysterious interior of the wall was a mystery that lay upon too many others for Seth to handle at the moment, though the thought that a single Carfelian had instigated such a discovery was a welcome turn of fate. The trust between the village and the Citadel would only improve. She had said that she'd be back bright and early tomorrow to do some further testing, and Seth hoped that he'd have time to talk with her again, but he knew that was likely impossible. Far darker responsibilities hung above his head. As soon as the evening feast concluded and farewells for the night were said, fortunately without further concerns than a minor squabble between Steward Sportel and Jesper over the intensity of his voice right next to her, Seth hurried to the archives, now desperate to speak with Jin. Though the incident in the forge rooms had temporarily distracted him, the returning concern had flared all the stronger. As he locked his doorway and unsealed the jar, he was at first shocked, then relieved to see that it was moving about as normal. Well, almost as normal. It was now in a form that was most reminiscent of a small dough man that had come to life just before being put in the oven. Though he was adverse to thinking it, the little Jin was almost cute, if it weren't for the gleaming green eyes and sharpened teeth. It swung an invisible weapon in rather elegant motions, not in the fervor of battle, but in the typical movements of one deep in practice. Jin, have you approached the enemy yet? Have you found Cullen? And what exactly is it that you are doing?
Ah, Lord Sernir, I must say that your restraint is impressive. Considering how invested you are in every tiny part of me, I would have expected another few visits today. However, to answer your questions as succinctly as possible, no, yes, and becoming far greater than you'll ever be with this glorious weapon.
The brazenness of the creature was almost refreshing, but it still succeeded in aggravating him. If you have time for such quips, you have time to give me proper details. Where are you exactly, and is Cullen all right?
No interest in how I'm improving beyond the whole of your imagination. Well, I suppose those who send a shape-shifting tool to do a simple search and reconnaissance expedition mission lack a lot of it, so no mystery there.
The creature stopped moving, and reformed into its original orb form.
I traveled up the mountain, and am now just beyond sight among the ruins of Traveler's Pass. Not a single Markeltian, Rotrarian, or Contrarian has entered my vision, but an annoying kid and his boar showed up. I found them a cozy cave, and they are sleeping like a pair of rocks. Living rocks, that is, don't you worry yourself.
Seth sighed. That's good. If they remain safe, I command you to search Traveler's Pass once more. If you can find any tracks or any hints of Clan Markelt or Clan Rotra's presence, you are to tell me in the morning. Is that understood?
Certainly so. Goodness, you grow more paranoid by the day. I'd advise you to lay off the spirits, but I think you'd get tipsy with fresh-pressed cider.
With a sigh, he placed the cloak over the jar again. At least he could enter the respite of slumber for a time, the last slumber before the long-awaited feast. Within a few minutes, he laid to rest. However, as soon as he closed his eyes, they opened. He blinked and saw the shining light of dawn peering through the curtains. Had the night passed so quickly? He stood up to unveil Jin, but he froze as the stand next to his bed lay empty. Someone had taken it while he slept! He shot out of bed as utter panic tore through him. If it had been stolen away, there would be no way to contact Jin, no way to ensure that everyone was safe. As he left his room, racing down the stairwell, he called out for the guards, for Madame Athel, even for Eldred, but there was no one in sight. He stumbled across the great hall to the training grounds, tumbling to the sand at the bottom. He looked up, shocked to discover that it was midday, but that the skies were completely blotted out by thick clouds of dark scarlet. His gaze flashed all around, trying to find someone, anyone who might be able to explain what had happened, but no one answered. He struggled to his feet and continued his now desperate search. By the time he reached the village square, the darkness had only intensified, casting the blood-red light over everything, and piercing him with the realization that Seth was the sole inhabitant of this twisted landscape. He sank to his knees, bewildered, terrified, and lost. There, crouched before the stone image of his father, the sole human figure in all the world, Seth saw the clouds burst into a torrential downpour, washing away all vision in waves of shining crimson. He clawed at the blindness, desperate to see, to breathe, and found himself tearing away blankets that had been drenched in sweat. Reason swiftly returned, but the sight of the valley disappearing under a blood-red sky still flashed before him with every blink, more present than any painting. Seth looked to the window, and the sense of relief at seeing the calm golden light of the sun was matched only by the sight of the unmoved jar to his left. Thank the High Keepers, it had only been a vicious nightmare. However, never before had he experienced such a lifelike dream, much less one that had no form or constant other than raw fear. Even now, the dread he had felt remained burning in his stomach. He quickly removed the cloak from the jar and commanded, "Awaken, Jin!" The creature looked up at him with an almost sarcastic stare, now returned to a small blob with a minuscule eye, ear, and mouth all shifting about.
No need to command such a thing to one who isn't asleep. My, what a light rester you are, Master Sernir. Up until a minute ago, the forager was still snoozing from when we last spoke, all snug and warm in the little cave I found for him."
Seth rubbed his eyes, still trying to get that dream out of his head. "And yet you've had time to search the mountainside for the clan's tracks, I hope. Do you need as much sleep as you do food?"
"You forget that I've had a good 30 years of that stuff. Don't worry, the only tracks in the snow are those of tiny beasts, your forager and his bigger beast, and my own handiwork."
It suddenly grinned at Seth with an even wider mouth.
"Ah, my mastery over lower tools is so wonderful. Did you know that I can bind even the very steel I see to my own will? If I'd known you could consecrate something to yourself, I'd have prayed more in my youth."
It laughed in glee.
"If you had any qualms at all, Master Sernir, consider them alleviated."
Somehow, Jin saying that only deepened the pit in his stomach. "I will contact you after the feast. Be careful and remember my orders. The valley must be kept safe." He covered the jar with the cloak once more, not bothering to wait for whatever obnoxious comment was about to be flung at him. He rubbed his eyes again. Still, the dream remained. As the day drew on past the mountains, there was a great clamor throughout the citadel as excitement mounted for the celebrational feast. The sun hung high in a blue void of an almost entirely cloudless sky, though the wisps of white beyond the Carfelian range showed that a snowstorm was striking the lower peaks beyond. It was as if the High Keepers themselves desired to join the festivities, and so ordained that the day would be perfect. Even so, a deep sense of uncertainty and worry was all that Seth could feel as he donned a special emerald-lined vesture used only for such yearly events. He greeted Madame Athel upon the stairwell. She was, as were many of the other Genronites, dressed in her finest garments. She studied his appearance for a moment before giving a curt nod.
"I can't say that you've quite grown into that thing, but the blue collar matches your eyes quite well."
"That will do for now. It's not as if these ancient stones can be shrunken, after all." He closed his eyes for a moment, then gave the order. "Before the feast begins, I must speak with the stewards. Please have them join me in the Aurorian tent. Secrecy is paramount."
"I see. It shall be done, Lord Sernir."
The walk down to the main hall felt longer than ever today. Perhaps it was, as by the time he reached the bottom, the sunlight shone down through every window, dappling the ground with turquoise, emerald, and crimson. So much crimson. He took another deep breath, and amidst a host of others from the citadel, stepped out and into the village. How wonderfully a place could be transformed when everyone united their efforts. The plaza was ringed with assorted banners and collections of foods, and many Carfelians dressed in their own rustic finery moved about, some testing instruments, others escorting wagons back and forth. Even a garland of hand-woven patterns was arranged upon the central statue of his father, reaching all the way to the newly built wooden platform where he would stand during the post-feast speech. Regardless, it was all he could do to muster a smile and to greet those who came to speak with him. There were many familiar faces, including Thesling, the Frenets, and old Galila the cordial maker, who all expressed their delight at his presence, but many others who he'd never met also wished him well. Their happiness was so potent and apparent, even as they were unknowingly at the brink of utter destruction. His mind began to waver, wondering if he should never tell them of the threat, or if he should announce it here and now. Which would be more merciful? Thankfully, Captain Hinault was able to find him among the crowd, and his report that the stewards were ready brought him back to his senses. Had the dream affected him that much? Was this some sort of madness that had begun to claim him? He shoved those thoughts away as he prepared to relay for the third time that week the absolute perils that lay in wait along the stream of time, ready to pounce upon all who dwelt in the valley. The tent was situated slightly north of the village, close enough to the citadel for ease of travel, but far enough away for privacy. As Seth walked in, he saw the three others staring at him, each with a different expression. Steward Clive Bortel sat lengthwise upon his seat with a displeased look on his face attesting to his annoyance with being called from his mid-morning archery, likely the show for the Carfelian children he'd mentioned at the meal yesterday. Steward Avine Jesper set down her book, rubbing the perch of her nose as she nodded towards Seth with what was probably meant to be a short bow. And Steward Ives. "So tell me, what is it exactly that warrants such secrecy?" Rashan smiled, sitting between them with his hands clasped on the table as he leaned forward. "Don't tell me such an inopportune meeting has to do with some sort of simple update to the old schedule." If he was this eager to begin, Seth wouldn't waste time easing them in. "I'm afraid that you are, in a way, correct." Seth pointed to the table, which had been overlaid with a map of the valley. "Not more than a few days ago, a Carfelian forager discovered 2 allied armies from the old Empire were making their way up Traveler's Pass. They are likely preparing for conquest at any cost. All of the steward's eyes widened immediately, Rashan's smile fading, and Evine quickly stood up.
"You'd let yourself be fooled by a peasant," she snapped. "Or is this some sort of jest to keep us in line?"
Well, before he could answer, Clive laughed. "I wondered why you were acting so solemn this morning. No, he believes it, Evie, but I'd like to know why." Seth nodded and drew forth the breastplates from the sack he'd prepared. "I trust these gifts from the forager will be enough to prove both his truthfulness and that of myself. Their make is unknown to me, and the sigils perfectly match those written in the Genranite tomes." Evine slowly sat back in her seat, her face swiftly growing pale as she stared at the armor. Clive picked up one and began inspecting it closely as Rashan blinked twice. I see." He unclasped his hands and leaned back. "Well, I'd always feared this sort of thing would happen one day." He shook his head with a sigh, and once more with a smile he asked, "I trust you have already prepared some sort of precautions for such a thing, concerned as you are with the absolute innocence of everyone in the valley. Is that correct?" Seth reluctantly nodded. "However, I cannot guarantee that what I've prepared will stop them. As such, I need your assistance. I fear that this is a mortal threat upon all of us." Rashan nodded. "Wonderful. That's better than any sort of tired and opaque concern of yours. This will give us just what we need to solidify our relationship with the Carfelians forevermore." What in the world did he mean? Seth looked at him in perplexment, motioning for the steward to continue. Rashan did so gladly. "We shall announce the approaching threat, and in the very same breath ensure that we shall end it without fail. If these outsiders portend our doom, then we know we must strive against them with every ounce of strength, with no room for error. Then, when we overcome and survive their onslaught, not only will we be seen as invincible heroes to the Carfelians, but due to such an announcement beforehand, reliable beyond all measure. Besides, they already love you. It's as clear as day, even without knowing a hint at their tongue. As I said, and I'm sure my comrades here agree, we were wrong to try and use old Error's tricks. With the confidence they have in you, I doubt they'll fear even until these armies come barreling through that gate. And with the history of your family, and all the extreme sweetness and bitterness at their command, I doubt that even the Mortal's Bane could topple us." Rashan always seemed to speak in phrases that bore similarities to riddles, despite his genuine tone and friendly gaze, but this was even further than before. Evine sniffed indignantly. "You think we could withstand the Mortal's Bane? I'd not speak of such inhuman monsters in so flippant a tone, Steward Ives. By all rights, my ancestors should have won against them, but not only is their skin as hard as stone, their bodies have some obscene boon to be almost impervious to poison." Clive nodded. "And that's why the ability to gauge such strength is a trait of victors." She glared at him. "And the only trait of cowards. Are you saying that this threat is one in which we should just turn our bellies up and pray they don't gouge them out?" "Not at all. These armor sets are too small for such behemoths anyway." He dropped it with a clatter upon the table. "I dare say your family's concoctions might just work against these fellows." "I won't have you insult my ancestors' lost art, Steward Bortel." He scoffed. "It wasn't meant as any such thing, Evie." The venom in her eyes rivaled whatever poisons her people could have possibly crafted. This was going nowhere. Seth cleared his throat. "Enough of this. Markelt and Rotroir were sworn enemies of one another, and yet they are working together far better than the two of you." Clive smiled graciously, bowing in apology towards Seth, and Evine reluctantly did the same. Seth could tell that her anger hadn't faltered much, but he was unsure of what to say that wouldn't make this feud of theirs worse. Instead, he turned to Rashan, who had been watching the others with a faint amusement. "Your desire to gain the Carfelians' love is understandable, but it seems that you are assuming only the most fortunate scenario for us. 3 decades have passed since we've seen anyone from the outside world. What our ancestors knew of that land might have dramatically changed since then, and powers beyond what we can imagine may have been created. These armies had with them immense lizards that would make even Steward Bartel's pangolin look like a simple beast of burden, to draw upon one example." Rashan shrugged. "I suppose so, though I doubt that such powers could overcome those that are harboured within the valley. As for my optimism, you can't blame me for looking at the soft side of the dragon without knowing the details. I think we'd all appreciate you telling us what you've gleaned from that forager and your books before we continue, rather than guess based off of vague allusions and hints." "Yes, as I intended." Before Seth began, he couldn't help dwelling on the second reference to Jinn that Ives had mentioned. Though he'd revealed the secret to some of his closest allies, Seth was still uncertain that the stewards could be trusted with such dangerous information. He hoped that this could pass in time. With that, he attempted to describe the full situation and the current strategy to deal with the invading clans, though it was much harder to avoid the tremors in his voice than it had been 2 days ago. Even so, their faces didn't show much of a drastic change from their initial concern. By the time he'd finished, he was surprised at just how well they'd handled such dire news. As of today, they have yet to breach the pass itself. We will likely have a few weeks before they reach the gates of the village. Aveen peered at Seth. You say that rather authoritatively. Do you have someone providing you information? The pass is being watched at all times. We will know if they cross. Clive chuckled. Sure, though whoever it is will be watching for a while. These blokes come from the desert, and now they need to climb up one of those peaks as winter breaks? No, I'm pretty sure we've got at least a few months. More than enough time to prepare. Hells, you can even prepare another landslide and wash them away. That worked well last time, didn't it? Seth's thoughts were touched by anger for a moment. How much did they secretly accuse his father of masterminding? Even if the landslide back then was our doing, which it wasn't, only the architects of Error could have created such a technological marvel, and they have long since disappeared. Besides, these clans are a uniquely tenacious people. We cannot assume anything about their entrapment. Aye, fair enough. I'll be glad to provide whatever aid is needed. Clive sat back, and Aveen quickly noted her willingness to assist as well. A gleam of opportunity flashed in Rashan's eye. While you likewise have my full service for this endeavor, as per the agreement of our families, I think that you are seriously underestimating the importance of holding every citadel, speaking of such technological Aurorian marvels. The tall man quickly pointed to the locations of the 4 fortresses on the table's map. If we abandon all but one, then this valley will remain a battlefield for years, even if a whole host of powerful warriors manifested before us and swore fealty. This is because even 5 men can keep one of these places secure against 100 others, and with all of us combined, we bear a rather wonderful ratio against our foes. Abandoning the other citadels will leave them open for the taking, and then we shall never root out these threats once they have strongholds of their own. Seth wasn't sure of that. Even if the walls towered above most trees, they could still be swarmed by strong laddermen if they crossed over the moats, difficult as that may be. However, Rashan's confidence was infectious, and his points were admittedly very insightful. If Seth truly wanted to keep the valley out of the hands of any outsiders, then a bastion of defenders in every location might be necessary. Thank the High Keepers for the Famine-Bane route, as Eldred had taken to calling the bitter Aurorian plant. If that grew in every fortress, the ignorant outsiders might try and fail to wait them out. Yes, your ideas have merit. I will leave it to each of you to assign those you wish to protect your citadels. However, you must inform them of the absolute finality of what it is they are doing. If we cannot regularly contact them, we will not know if they have been overtaken. I think you need to have more faith in the hidden strengths passed on to you, Lord Seth. If not that, you must at the very least see this as I do if you want to win. Stuart Ives grinned as he flipped his dagger in an absurdly dramatic fashion. If we lose, considering the culture and condition of our foes... He struck down on the map, tearing the fabric apart where the village citadel was portrayed. Then you will die. Your line will be snuffed out forever, and every hope and dream you held will vanish into the ether. There is no worse fate. Seth's heart pounded as Rashan stared at him with narrow eyes, and even the others sat in watchful silence. So, rather than fret and worry over what might happen, feel confident in the knowledge that you know exactly what the future will hold. As I said earlier, you will either overcome this threat, or you won't. So act as if you shall crush your enemies under wave after wave of strategy and skill, and hold no regrets no matter the loss. With all at your disposal, it shouldn't be difficult. He let the silence hang for a single tense moment. Then Rashan spun the dagger once more and sheathed it. But all of that will be in the future. For now, let's enjoy the day while we can. No need for desperation, especially when we have such a powerful lord and his weapons watching the pass for us. He raised his eyebrow. Well, Lord Seth? Yes, I've said all I needed to. And more besides, he thought. You may return to the feast. Hein's teeth. He should have known they would have expected him to have already used his father's weapon after threatening them with it so often, and now they were still suspicious that he was hiding further secrets. But what other secrets could there be? He watched Aveen and Clive leave, the former giving a quiet bow before vanishing, while the latter quickly requested a second meeting after the feast to discuss setting up a training ground before snatching up his bow and whistling for Folly, his mount. If they were so certain that other secrets besides Jinn existed, then... sorry about the map. I have an excellent tailor who will get that all fixed up. However, my point was properly made because of it, right? Like I said, no regrets, Lord Seth. With that, Rashan laughed and departed the tent. Seth shivered. He couldn't help but feel that a battle had just concluded, and that he had somehow lost. Finally, after so many weeks of preparation, the feast had begun. However, the spectre of the Crimson Dream continued to hang above him, lurking in the snow-capped peaks whenever they caught his eye. The absolute assurance that he alone held the sole hope to stop it weighed heavily upon him, making every worry repeat with the beat of his heart. How could Rashon ever hold such beliefs? It was more than simply to survive or not. If half the valley were to be slain in the process of rebuking the attackers, how could that be any better than to die? The next few hours passed by for Seth in a haze of fear, worse than any dream. The fishing contest concluded with Moni and Mari landing an enormous river eel alongside their Carfelian friends, the largest in the history of the valley, and they cheered as they held up Thessling's beautiful wood-carved trophy. Shining emerald medals were conferred on Captain Trevin and his guards, each emblazoned with the mark of the Mist Bay heroes of old, and granting their honor to the soldiers for their valorous capture of the monstrous lake wolf. Ivy Fernet's music was joined by farmers from the outer fields and cooks from the citadel during the dance, leading to a chaotic yet exciting new type of festival tune that shook the whole plaza. Therina and Festus introduced a brand new sauce that they'd created that very morning by placing several gallons of the mysterious water into a fire duster, which they announced as being called Cephian syrup, a remarkable addition to any breaded treat, and an emblem of unity between the citadel and the village named after the one who had given the coins and made it all possible. All of these things should have been wonderful occasions, some reaching the daydreamed visions that Seth had had in his youth, but now every single one of them felt like a sick nightmare that faded unceremoniously into reality before falling apart into chaos. The cheers at each contest rose into a cacophony of terrified screams as armored warriors charged through the streets. The most luxurious food turned to burnt ash of torched buildings in his mouth. Soon, he could hardly even see the dancing as being any different from a desperate melee. Even the naming right of the new child of the Frenet family held a twisted irony, for Serene was so called at the eve of an era that would be anything but. Even so, he held onto the joy which emanated from everyone, and it gave him the strength to continue through what was 1,000 years of agony. A couple of times, he was asked by some of the villagers as to where Cullen's whereabouts were, if he was with his father Arthas, or how long it would take him, and all he could do was assure them of the forager's safety and the importance of his mission. What if he was lying to them? He had no way to know. How he wished he could leave for just an hour and visit Jin, just to give himself a moment's peace. As the great meal was nearing its end, a feast which would have made the legends feel ashamed, and a meal that Seth had hardly ingested more than a tiny plate of, the expected time for the speech began. This was something he could do. He had memorized the words which would thank all the people of the valley for their wonderful year, and despite the grim hardships of a greatly emphasized winter season, they would thrive together for many an age. However, as he was nearing the wooden platform facing west over the square, where the stewards and Genra knights were already awaiting him, his eyes wandered once more to the arc and the Carfelian range where Traveler's Pass lay, now covered in deep snow. There, he saw something that threw all of his inner fears and worries out of his mind and into reality. It was faint, yet unmistakable. A red billowing plume of smoke, large as a cloud, was rising above the pass. He had no knowledge at all in any capacity of what it was, what it meant, beyond a faint descriptor of Cullen's report. Yet the crimson bulb in that was nothing compared with this monstrosity that had crossed the divide of dreams. He stumbled to the ground, gasping for air. "Lord Seth, is something the matter?" There was a thump as the steward leapt down, though the faint whispers of worry from all of them were leagues away. He had to know. He had to contact Jin immediately. Nothing else mattered. As Rashon helped him up, Seth whispered, "Please, speak to them for me. I cannot explain why, but I must go." Though his eyes were full of concern, Rashon smiled. "Truly, your will is my pleasure." Seth stumbled to the back of the tent behind the platform, the pounding in his chest growing louder and louder. As he ran down the empty street towards the tower, Rashon's joking commendation of Miss Galila's cordial that surpassed even a lord's constitution faded into the distance, and still he could not place the absolute terror he now felt. He glanced back once before entering the empty citadel, hoping that he had seen nothing more than a cruel hallucination, but the dread smoke above the pass only continued to rise. By the time he reached the archives, his lungs felt as if they were aflame, and he collapsed upon the floor of his room. Even over the world-shattering drumbeat of his heart, he could hear a faint scream, primordial and horrific. He struggled to his feet and tore off the covering, knocking the jar off of the stand in the process. It bounced once on the floor, a single crack showing in the side, but it didn't shatter. Seth stared at the tiny creature within, and his face paled.